The atmosphere in the Grand Law Office was heavy with anticipation. A room full of family members, lawyers, and associates sat in silence, waiting for the will of Marcus Holloway, the late black billionaire entrepreneur and philanthropist, to be read. The air was thick with tension. Marcus had been a legend, a self-made man who had built an empire from nothing. He had risen from the rough streets of Harlem to become one of the most influential and successful tech moguls in the world. His legacy was one of greatness, but also one of secrecy. As the lawyer, Mr. Jenkins, cleared his throat and began reading the will, a sense of unease settled over the room. To my children, I leave equal shares in my fortune. The lawyer's voice was steady but the weight of his words was clear. There was an expectation that the reading would be routine, that Marcus' two children, Jonathan and Ava, would inherit the wealth their father had accumulated. After all, both had been by his side through much of his rise to success, Jonathan as a businessman, and Ava as an activist. But just as the lawyer was about to continue, the door to the office swung open with a sudden force, interrupting the solemn moment. A small figure stood at the entrance, his presence unnoticed at first due to his size, but the look on his face was unmistakable. He was only 6 years old, but the intensity in his eyes made him stand out against the sea of adult faces in the room. Jaden Holloway, Marcus' long-hidden son, had arrived. The boy's appearance sent a shockwave through the room. None of the family members had ever seen him before, and the lawyer himself was taken aback. Jaden was the product of Marcus' first, secret relationship, a relationship Marcus had kept hidden from the public and even from his own family. For years, the rumor of a secret son had floated around, but no one had ever expected this little boy to step forward and reveal himself. His existence had been buried under layers of secrecy, never acknowledged by the family or Marcus' inner circle. Jaden's eyes scanned the room, wide and curious, but also filled with a quiet sense of resolve. He stood in the doorway, his small frame dressed in a suit that was a bit too big for him, an oversized jacket and a tie that hung loosely around his neck. The suit, formal yet clearly borrowed, highlighted the innocence of his youth, but his posture, straight and unyielding, conveyed something far more serious. He didn't speak at first. He simply stood there, the only sound in the room the quiet murmurs of disbelief from the adults. Jaden's presence was a challenge, an unspoken question: why am I not here? Why was I never part of the family? His small hands fidgeted with the edges of his oversized suit jacket, but his gaze never wavered. Finally, Jaden spoke, his voice calm but filled with the gravity of the moment. "I'm not here for the money," he said softly. "I'm here because I'm his son. And I deserve to know the truth. To know why I was kept away." The room fell silent. Family members exchanged confused and concerned glances. They had no idea what to make of the young boy in front of them. But Jaden wasn't here to claim what had been hidden from him, he was here to reveal the truth. The truth about his existence, his father's choices, and the legacy that had been kept from him. As he stepped further into the room, his small footsteps echoing on the cold floor, the weight of his words began to settle in. Jaden had grown up without the privileges his half-siblings had known, without the wealth or the recognition of being Marcus' child. Yet, he stood there not with resentment, but with a quiet, determined clarity. He didn't need his father's fortune to prove his worth. What he needed was an answer. What he needed was the acknowledgement of the truth. And he would make sure that everyone in the room knew it. This was just the beginning. The inheritance was no longer just about wealth, it was about a deeper, more personal truth that was long buried in the shadows of the Holloway name. Jaden stood at the front of the room, his small figure poised and firm, surrounded by a sea of adults who couldn't seem to look away. The air was thick with confusion, guilt, and surprise, and though the room was silent, the weight of his words hung in the air like a storm about to break. Every eye was on him, some curious, others skeptical, and a few filled with outright discomfort. But Jaden wasn't fazed. At just 6 years old, he stood taller than most of the grown-ups around him, not physically, but in the quiet, resolute confidence that radiated from him. The family members, who had once admired Marcus Holloway from afar, exchanging stories of his success and philanthropy, now faced the reality of his secret. For years, they had been oblivious to Jaden's existence, never once considering that Marcus had kept this truth hidden. A son, born from a love that never made it to the public eye. Now, the child who had grown up in the shadows of his father's empire was standing before them, ready to speak his truth. With his small hands fidgeting nervously with the cuffs of his jacket, Jaden addressed the room. His voice, though soft, had a weight to it that demanded attention. "You all think you knew Marcus," he began, his eyes sweeping across the room, meeting the gazes of the family members who were now visibly shifting in their seats. "But you didn't. You didn't know the man who kept secrets from all of you, secrets that affected me, too." The room, once filled with murmurs of surprise and disbelief, now grew still. His words cut through the air like a knife, exposing the unspoken truths that had been carefully avoided for so long. Jaden was not here for their pity or sympathy, he was here to challenge their perception of his father, and perhaps, their own worth in the legacy of Marcus Holloway. "I'm not here for what you think I want," Jaden continued, his voice gaining strength with every word. "I don't need his fortune. I don't need his name. I've already built my own life, my own future. But I'm here for something far more important, for the truth to be heard." He paused for a moment, his eyes softening as they fixed on the lawyer, Mr. Jenkins, who had been quietly standing by, waiting for the storm to settle. "I know my father made mistakes. He kept me in the dark, kept me away from everything, all because of the choices he made. But I've never needed anyone to tell me who I am. I've always known." Jaden's small chest puffed out as he took a step forward, moving past the uncomfortable glances of the adults. It was a moment of defiance, a moment that most would have expected to be beyond the reach of a child so young. But in that moment, Jaden seemed to embody something far older, an understanding of the world's cruelty, and a refusal to let it define him. The family members exchanged glances, unable to hide the shock and discomfort on their faces. Some were embarrassed, realizing just how little they had known about Marcus' past. Others were angry, resentful of the fact that they had been left out of a part of Marcus' life they had no knowledge of. Jaden, however, wasn't there to make them comfortable. He was there to demand respect, not for the fortune, but for his existence and for the truth that had been silenced for so long. With each passing second, Jaden's voice became more certain, more defiant. "I'm not here to make anyone feel guilty. I'm here because I have the right to know why I was forgotten. Why my father chose to shut me out while he gave everything to others. I want answers, not wealth." Jaden paused, his small hands still clasped tightly together as he looked toward the lawyer. "I don't want what should have been mine all along. I want what was hidden. I want to know why my father kept me from this world, why I was left in the shadows." The family members, now aware of the full scope of Jaden's feelings, fell silent. Their discomfort turned to introspection. How could they have known Marcus so well when they didn't even know this part of him, the part that had been carefully tucked away from the world? It was a painful realization for them all, one that made them question the very foundation of the life Marcus had built. Jaden didn't flinch. He didn't look away. Instead, he stood firm, his eyes never leaving the faces of those in the room. His father's legacy wasn't just about wealth, power, or status, it was about the untold story of a child who had been erased from that legacy, and Jaden was determined to make sure it wasn't forgotten any longer. The room had been shaken, and Jaden had made his mark. The inheritance was no longer just about the distribution of money. It was about reclaiming what was rightfully his, not out of greed, but out of the necessity to understand who he truly was in the context of the life Marcus Holloway had lived. He wasn't just a boy looking for a piece of his father's fortune. He was a young man, already shaping his own destiny, standing in the midst of a truth that could not be hidden any longer. The silence that followed Jaden's declaration was deafening. Family members shifted uncomfortably in their seats, their eyes darting around the room as if searching for someone to make sense of this new reality. Jaden stood firm, his small body standing taller with every moment, his presence demanding to be acknowledged. He wasn't here for their approval, he was here to claim what had been denied to him for so long. As the lawyer, Mr. Jenkins, fumbled nervously with the papers in front of him, Jaden's focus remained unwavering. He had come to confront a hidden past. A past that had shaped him and been carefully buried by the very man who should have been his father. Mr. Jenkins, after a brief hesitation, turned to the stack of papers before him and slowly pulled out a sealed envelope. The room watched, breath held, as he opened it and began reading the contents aloud. "This letter is addressed to Jaden Holloway," the lawyer read aloud, his voice tinged with both reverence and confusion. "Jaden, I'm sorry for the silence. I was a coward. I could never tell you this in person, and I fear that it's too late now. You were always my son, but I couldn't be the father you needed me to be. Your existence was my greatest secret, and I carried that burden alone for far too long." Jaden's heart pounded in his chest as he listened. The words of his father, written long ago, were like the echo of a distant memory. Marcus Holloway's handwritten letter revealed the truth that had been buried for so many years. A truth that neither Jaden nor anyone else had known. The lawyer continued, his voice faltering slightly as he read more of the letter. "I made choices to keep you away from the world. I thought you'd be better off, away from the complications of my life. But I was wrong. You were my son, and I failed you. I want you to know that despite everything, you were always in my heart. The wealth you inherit here today, it's yours by right. But I want you to do something with it. I want you to build something new, to carry on what I couldn't finish." Jaden stood motionless, his young face a mixture of disbelief and sadness as the full weight of his father's words settled over him. The revelation was devastating, not because of the wealth he had been denied, but because of the life he had been forced to live in the shadow of secrets and lies. Marcus Holloway, the man who had created an empire, had also built walls around his son. Walls that kept Jaden in the dark about who he truly was, and about the legacy he was entitled to. For so many years, Jaden had carried the ache of being abandoned, not by his mother, who had loved him fiercely, but by a father who had chosen to hide him away from the world. His genius, his talents, his very existence had been kept secret, and that secret had now been exposed, not for the world to judge, but for Jaden himself to finally understand. The letter, filled with remorse and guilt, was not just an apology. It was a confession. Jaden's father had lived his life with the burden of this secret, and now, at the end of his own life, Marcus had decided to reveal it. But the apology, though heartfelt, couldn't undo the years of silence. It couldn't erase the pain of growing up without his father's presence, without the recognition he deserved. Jaden blinked back tears, fighting to maintain his composure. His young heart, already filled with a quiet strength, now carried the weight of understanding. The fortune that Marcus had left behind was not what mattered. What mattered was the legacy of secrets, the love that had been kept hidden, and the void that had been created by a father's choice to leave his son in the shadows. As the lawyer finished reading, the room was filled with stunned silence. The family members sat frozen, unable to speak, each of them grappling with the revelation that Marcus had lived a life they had never truly known. The Holloway name, so synonymous with success and wealth, was now tied to a secret that had been buried beneath layers of ambition, pride, and regret. Jaden, despite the sting of the truth, didn't let the revelation break him. He wasn't the scared child who had once yearned for his father's acknowledgement. He was a boy who had grown into his own man, who had built something for himself without the need for anyone's validation. This truth, painful as it was, would not define him. Instead, it would fuel him. "I'm not here for the wealth," Jaden said softly, his voice steady despite the storm inside him. "I'm here because I deserve to know the truth. And I won't let anyone erase who I am." The family members, still reeling from the shock, couldn't argue with him. The truth had been laid bare, and in that moment, Jaden Holloway, son of Marcus Holloway, a boy hidden in silence, had claimed his place in a story that had long been silenced. This wasn't about inheritance. This was about reclaiming his identity, his legacy, and the truth that had been denied to him for far too long. The silence in the room was deafening as Jaden's words settled like dust after a storm. The family, who had once been at the center of Marcus Holloway's empire, now sat in stunned silence. The air was thick with guilt, confusion, and the raw weight of truth. For so long, they had admired Marcus for his public achievements, his generosity, and his success. But now, faced with the revelation of his secret son, they were forced to confront the hidden side of the man they thought they knew so well. Jaden, standing at the front of the room, felt no sense of triumph or satisfaction. His eyes were steady, but there was a quiet sadness in them, a sadness that only someone who had been abandoned for years could understand. This wasn't about vengeance or anger, it was about the years he had spent in the shadows, denied the chance to know his father and, by extension, the chance to understand his place in the world. He wasn't here to collect wealth or property, Jaden had already built his own empire. He had grown up with his mother, quietly and diligently developing his own genius in the world of technology. By the time he was 16, he had created an app that would later turn into a $1 million startup, his first major success. Jaden wasn't just a product of Marcus' legacy, he was an individual who had carved his own path. But even with all that success, there was still an emptiness inside him, a hole that only the truth could fill. "I'm not here for what you all think I want," Jaden's voice rang out, cutting through the tension in the room. "I'm here because I deserve to know why my father kept me hidden. Why I never got a chance to know him, why I was denied the chance to be part of his life." He paused, letting his words sink in.